Executive Order 13,769, titled Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States, was an executive order issued by United States President Donald Trump in effect, except to the extent blocked by various courts, from January 27, 2017 until March 16, 2017. The effective date of Executive Order 13,780. Executive Order 13,769 lowered the number of refugees to be admitted into the United States in 2017 to 50,000. Suspended the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, USRAP, for 120 days. Suspended the entry of Syrian refugees indefinitely. Directed some cabinet secretaries to suspend entry of those whose countries do not meet adjudication standards under U.S. immigration law, and included exceptions on a case-by-case basis. Homeland Security lists these countries as Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. Immediately, there were numerous protests and legal challenges. A nationwide temporary restraining order, TRO, was issued on February 3, 2017 in the case Washington v. Trump, which was upheld by the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit on February 9, 2017. Consequently, the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, stopped enforcing portions of the order, and the State Department revalidated visas that had been previously revoked. The order was criticized by members of Congress from both parties, universities, business leaders, Catholic bishops, top United Nations officials, a group of 40 Nobel laureates, Jewish organizations, 1,000 U.S. diplomats who signed a dissent cable, thousands of academics, and long-standing U.S. allies. The order was criticized because it was seen by many as a Muslim ban, and because of its human impact on travelers and visa holders. More than 700 travelers were detained and up to 60,000 visas were provisionally revoked. Background: statutory authorization and related prohibitions. Visas issued in 2016 for the 7 countries affected by Section 3 of the Executive Order. Total is shown by size, and color breaks down type of visa. Whenever the President finds that the entry of any aliens or of any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may by proclamation, and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens, or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem to be appropriate. The act that underlies this, known as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, a.k.a. the McCarran-Walter Act, was amended by the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, a.k.a. the Hart-Celler Act, which included a provision stating, "No person shall receive any preference or priority or be discriminated against in the issuance of an immigrant visa because of the person's race, sex, nationality, place of birth, or place of residence." The language in the INA of 1965 is among the reasons District of Maryland Judge Chuang issued a temporary restraining order blocking Section 2(c) of Executive Order 13,780. Restrictions by Obama administration. During the Obama administration, alien nationals of 38 countries could enter the U.S. for 90 days under the Visa Waiver Program. In 2015, Congress passed a Consolidated Appropriations Act to fund the government, and Obama signed the bill into law. The Visa Waiver Program Improvement and Terrorist Travel Prevention Act of 2015, which was previously passed by the House of Representatives as H.R. 158, was included in the Consolidated Appropriations Act. The Trump administration's executive order relied on H.R. 158 as enacted. Trump's press secretary Sean Spicer cited these existing restrictions as evidence that the executive order was based on outstanding policies, saying that the 7 targeted countries were put first and foremost by the Obama administration. Trump campaign and administration statements before the signing of Executive Order 13,769. Further information. Donald Trump Presidential Campaign 2016, ? Temporary Muslim ban proposal, and immigration policy of Donald Trump, ? Proposed Muslim immigration ban. Number of refugees admitted from October 1, 2016 through January 31, 2017, and states settled in. National origin for 7 countries in executive order colored. All other countries grouped in gray. Donald Trump became the U.S. president on January 20, 2017. He has long claimed that terrorists are using the U.S. refugee resettlement program to enter the country. During his initial election campaign, Trump had proposed a temporary, conditional, and total and complete ban on Muslims entering the United States. Visas by country in 2016, showing number issued by size, and countries selected in the executive order in orange, all others in green. On June 12, in reference to the 2016 Orlando nightclub shooting that occurred on the same date, Trump used Twitter to renew his call for a Muslim immigration ban. On July 15, Pence, who was governor of Indiana, attempted to suspend settlement of Syrian refugees to the state but was prevented from doing so by the courts. Said that decision was based on the fall 2015 FBI assessment that there is risk associated with bringing in refugees. Pence cited the infiltration of Iraqi refugees in Bowling Green, Kentucky, who were arrested in 2011 for attempting to provide weapons to ISIS, and Obama's suspension of the Iraqi refugee program in response as precedent for a U.S. president's temporarily suspend. On July 17, Trump, with Pence, participated in an interview on 60 Minutes that sought to clarify whether Trump's position on a Muslim ban had changed. When asked whether he had changed position on the Muslim ban, he said, "No, I call it whatever you want. We'll call it territories. Okay." Quote. In an August 4 speech to a Maine audience, Trump called for stopping the practice of admitting refugees from among the most dangerous places in the world. Trump specifically opposed Somali immigration to Minnesota and Maine, describing the Somali refugee program, which has resettled tens of thousands of refugees in the U.S., as creating a rich pool of potential recruiting targets for Islamic terror groups. ? In Minnesota, 10 men of Somali or Oromo family backgrounds were charged with conspiring to travel to the Middle East to join ISIS, and 20 young men traveled to Somalia to join a terror group in 2007. In an August 15 speech, Trump listed terrorism attacks in the United States as justification for his proposals for increased ideological testing and a temporary ban on immigration from countries with a history of terrorism. On this point, the Los Angeles Times analysis observed Trump failed to mention that a number of the attackers were U.S. citizens, or had come to the U.S. as children. In a speech on August 31, Trump vowed to suspend the issuance of visas to places like Syria and Libya. Quote. In late November, following the Ohio State attack, President-elect Trump claimed the attacker was a Somali refugee who should not have been in the U.S. In an interview broadcast the day he would sign the order, President Trump told the Christian Broadcasting Network, CBN, that Christian refugees would be given priority in terms of refugee status in the United States. Antonio Guterres, then UN High Commissioner for Refugees, said in October 2015 that many Syrian Christians have ties to the Christian community in Lebanon, and have sought the UN services in smaller numbers. In January 2016, the Department of Justice, DOJ, on request of the Senate Subcommittee on Immigration and the National Interest, provided a list of 580 public international terrorism and terrorism-related convictions from September 11, 2001 through the end of 2014. Development. The New York Times said that candidate Trump in a speech on June 13, 2016, read from statutory language to justify the president's authority to suspend immigration from areas of the world with a history of terrorism. According to CNN, the executive order was developed primarily by White House officials, which the Los Angeles Times reported as including major architect Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon. Trump aides said that the order had been issued in consultation with Department of Homeland Security and State Department officials. Officials at the State Department and other agencies said it was not. On January 31, John Kelly told reporters that he did know it was under development and had seen at least 2 drafts of the order. White House cybersecurity advisor Rudy Giuliani said on Fox News that President Trump came to him for guidance over the order. Provisions. The version of the executive order posted at the White House website differs from the presidentially approved order published by the Federal Register. Section 1, describing the purpose of the order, invoked the September 11 attacks, stating that then State Department policy prevented consular officers from properly scrutinizing the visa applications of the attackers. The 7 countries targeted by the executive order exclude Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and other Muslim-majority countries where the Trump Organization has conducted business or pursued business opportunities. Visitors, immigrants, and refugees. Section 3 of the order blocks entry of aliens from Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen, for at least 90 days, regardless of whether or not they hold valid non-diplomatic visas. The Secretary of Homeland Security, in consultation with the Secretary of State and the Director of National Intelligence, must conduct a review to determine the information needed from any country to adjudicate any visa, admission, or other benefit under the INA. Within 30 days, the Secretary of Homeland Security must list countries that do not provide adequate information. Section 5 suspends the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, USRAP, for at least 120 days but stipulates that the program can be resumed for citizens of the specified countries if the Secretary of State, Secretary of Homeland Security and the Director of National Intelligence agree to do so. The order said that the Secretaries of State and Homeland Security may, on a case-by-case basis and when in the national interest, issue visas or other immigration benefits to nationals of countries for which visas and benefits are otherwise blocked. See the 9/11 Commission report at page 389. Secretary of Homeland Security, John Kelly, has stated to Congress that DHS is considering a requirement that refugees and visa applicants reveal social media passwords as part of security screening. The idea was one of many to strengthen border security, as well as requesting financial records. Green card holders. There was some early confusion about the status of green card holders, i.e., lawful permanent residents. According to the lawsuit filed by the states of Washington and Minnesota, dated February 3, the government had changed its position 5 times to date. According to the Associated Press, no green card holders were ultimately denied entry to the U.S., although several initially spent long hours in detention. Dual citizens. There was similar confusion about whether the order affected dual citizens of a banned country and a non-banned country. The State Department said that the order did not affect U.S. citizens who also hold citizenship of one of the 7 banned countries. On January 28, the State Department stated that other travelers with dual nationality of one of these countries, for example, an Iranian who also holds a Canadian passport, would not be permitted to enter. However, the International Air Transport Association told their airlines that dual nationals who hold a passport from a non-banned country would be allowed in. The United Kingdom's Foreign and Commonwealth Office issued a press release that the restrictions apply to those traveling from the listed countries, not those that merely have their citizenship. All entrants who are subject to adjudication. Section 4 orders development of a uniform screening procedure as part of the adjudication process. For immigration benefits, components of the screening procedure are suggested but not determined. Deleted provision regarding safe zones in Syria. A leaked prior draft of the order, published by The Washington Post before the order went into effect, would have ordered that the Secretary of State, in conjunction with the Secretary of Defense, is directed within 90 days of the date of this order to produce a plan to provide safe areas in Syria and in the surrounding region in which Syrian nationals displaced from their homeland can await firm settlement, such as repatriation or potential third-country resettlement. Quote, during and after his campaign, Trump proposed establishing safe zones in Syria as an alternative to Syrian refugees' immigration to the U.S. In the past, safe zones have been interpreted as establishing, among other things, no-fly zones over Syria. During the Obama administration, Turkey encouraged the U.S. to establish safe zones. The Obama administration was concerned about the potential for pulling the U.S. into a war with Russia. In the first weeks of Trump's presidency, Turkey renewed its call for safe zones and proposed a new plan for them. The Trump administration has spoken with several other Sunni Arab states regarding safe zones, and Russia has asked for clarification regarding any Trump administration plan regarding safe zones. The UN High Commissioner on Refugees and Bashar Assad have dismissed safe zones as unworkable. Impact. Terrorism. Trump's stated reason for issuing the executive order was to prevent terrorism. The New York Times reported that, for an action aimed at terrorism, the order appeared to garner little or no support among experts and former officials of every political stripe with experience in the field. Quote, according to New York Times reporter Scott Shane, the 7 countries in the executive order had random quality. The list excluded Saudi Arabia and Egypt, where many jihadist groups were founded, and Pakistan and Afghanistan, where extremism has a long history, and which have produced militants who have occasionally reached the United States. Implementation at airports. Shortly after the enactment of the executive order, at 4:42 p.m. on January 27, border officials across the country began enforcing the new rules. The New York Times reported people with various backgrounds and statuses being denied entry or sent back. This included refugees and minority Christians from the affected countries, as well as students and green card holders returning to the United States after visits abroad. People from the countries mentioned in the order with valid visas were turned away from flights to the U.S. On February 3, attorneys for the DOJ's Office of Immigration Litigation advised a judge hearing one of the legal challenges to the order that more than 100,000 visas have been revoked as a consequence of the order. They also advised the judge that no legal permanent residents have been denied entry. Numbers of affected persons. On January 30, Trump said on Twitter, only 109 people were detained and held for questioning. The effect of the order was far broader, however, than the number of people detained. In terms of barred visa holders, The federal government reported that more than 100,000 visas for foreigners inside and outside the United States have also been revoked, at least temporarily. Quote, in the weeks of 2017 prior to the executive order, the U.S. admitted approximately 1,800 refugees per week, total, from the 7 countries covered by the order. While the executive order was in effect, the U.S. received 2 refugees from those countries. Impact on U.S. industry. Google called its traveling employees back to the U.S. in case the order prevented them from returning. About 100 of the company's employees were thought to be affected by the order. Google CEO Sundar Pichai wrote in a letter to his staff that, "It's painful to see the personal cost of this executive order on our colleagues. We've always made our view on immigration issues known publicly and will continue to do so." Quote. However, Committee for Economic Development CEO Steve Odland, one effect of Trump's selection and policies, and in particular, Trump's executive order, is the Trump slump on the U.S. tourism industry, which contributed $1.47 trillion to the country's GDP in 2014, as reported by Fromers, according to Global Business Travel Association, as well as local tourist offices. With policies such as Executive Order 13,769 making foreigners feeling less welcome, fewer tourists began traveling to the U.S., with all foreign tourism down 6.8%, online searches for flights from foreign countries down 17%, and foreign business travel dropping by $185 million during the first week of the immigration suspension. Travelers and patients. According to Trita Parsi, the president of the National Iranian American Council, the order distressed citizens of the affected countries, including those holding valid green cards and valid visas. Those outside the U.S. fear that they will not be allowed in, while those already in the country fear that they will not be able to leave, even temporarily, because they would not be able to return. Some sources have stated that the executive order, if upheld, is likely to contribute to a doctor shortage in the United States, disproportionately affecting rural areas and underprovided specialties. Reactions. Democrats were nearly united in their condemnation of the policy. The order prompted broad condemnation from the international community, including long-standing U.S. allies. Some Catholic leaders have condemned the ban and encouraged mercy and compassion towards refugees. Some European far-right groups and politicians, such as Geert Wilders and French presidential candidate Marine Le Pen, applauded the executive order. Jihadist and Islamic terrorist groups celebrated the executive order as a victory, saying that the new policy validates their claim that the United States is at war with Islam. Quote. Protests at airports. Trump immigration order sparks protests at New York's JFK International Airport. Report from Voice of America. From January 28, thousands of protesters gathered at airports and other locations throughout the United States to protest the signing of the order and detention of the foreign nationals, members of the United States Congress, including U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren, DMA, and U.S. Representative John Lewis, DGA, joined protests in their own home states. Legal challenges. Legal challenges to the order were brought almost immediately after its issuance. From January 28 to January 31, almost 50 cases were filed in federal courts. The courts, in turn, granted temporary relief, including a nationwide temporary restraining order, TRO, that bars the enforcement of major parts of the executive order. The TRO specifically blocks the executive branch from enforcing provisions of the executive order that suspend entry into the U.S. for people from 7 countries for 90 days and place limitations on the acceptance of refugees, including any action that prioritizes the refugee claims of certain religious minorities. Quote, the plaintiffs challenging the order argue that it contravenes the United States Constitution, federal statutes, or both. The parties challenging the executive order include both private individuals, some of whom were blocked from entering the U.S., or detained following the executive order's issuance, and the states of Washington and Minnesota, represented by their state attorneys general. Other organizations such as the ACLU also challenged the order in court. Additionally, 15 Democratic state attorneys general released a joint statement calling the executive order unconstitutional, un-American and unlawful, and that State of Washington versus Donald J. Trump et al. Hearing and bench ruling granting temporary restraining order. TRO. In response to the lawsuits, the Department of Homeland Security issued a statement on January 29 that it would continue to enforce the executive order and that prohibited travel will remain prohibited. On the same day, a White House spokesperson said that the rulings did not undercut the executive order. On January 30, Acting Attorney General Sally Yates, an Obama administration holdover pending the confirmation of Trump's nominee, barred the Justice Department from defending the executive order in court. She said she felt the order's effects were not in keeping with this institution's solemn obligation to always seek justice and stand for what is right. The state of Washington filed a legal challenge, State of Washington v. Trump, against the executive order. That same day, the Justice Department asked for an emergency stay to reverse Judge Robarts' ruling, temporarily blocking the executive order nationwide. The United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit denied Trump's immediate petition to stay the temporary restraining order from the Federal District Court in Washington state. Judge Alex Kozinski of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals filed a late dissent on March 17, 2017 to the Ninth Circle opinion in Washington v. Trump, arguing against the state of Washington's Establishment Clause claims on grounds that Trump's speech during the campaign was political, protected by the First Amendment, even though the Ninth Circuit had declined to address that issue in reaching its ruling on Washington v. Trump, and U.S. courts do not typically rule on issues that are not before them. Kozinski argued it was okay for him to address the issue because the district judge in Hawaii had cited the Ninth Circle opinion in reaching its Establishment Clause ruling. On February 13, Judge Leonie Brinkema of the Eastern District of Virginia ordered a preliminary injunction against the federal defendants in Aziz v. Trump because the executive order was likely discriminatory against Muslims. Her ruling was the first among cases challenging the executive order to find that plaintiffs were likely to succeed on grounds that the executive order violated the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Revocation and replacement. In February 2017, Trump suggested that the White House is trying to redraft the order to strengthen it against legal challenges. Quote, according to an administration officials, a redraft version of the executive order will focus on the same 7 countries minus Iraq. A redrafted executive order was issued March 6, 2017. On March 15, 2017, United States District Judge Derek Watson of the United States District Court for the District of Hawaii issued a temporary restraining order preventing Executive Order 13,780 from going into effect. suspended the entry of Syrian refugees indefinitely, directed some cabinet secretaries to suspend entry of those whose countries do not meet adjudication standards under U.S. immigration law, and included exceptions on a case-by-case basis. Homeland Security lists these countries as Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. Immediately, there were numerous protests and legal challenges. A nationwide temporary restraining order, TRO, was issued on February 3, 2017 in the case Washington v. Trump, which was upheld by the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit on February 9, 2017. Consequently, the Department of Homeland Security aka the McCarran-Walter Act, was amended by the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, aka the Hart-Celler Act, which included a provision stating, "No person shall receive any preference or priority or be discriminated against in the issuance of an immigrant visa because of the person's race, sex, nationality, place of birth, or place of residence." The language in the INA of 1965 is among the reasons District of Maryland Judge Chuang issued a temporary restraining order blocking Section 2C of Executive Order 13,780. Restrictions by Obama administration. During Executive Order 13,769, titled Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States, was an executive order issued by United States President Donald Trump in effect, except to the extent blocked by various courts, from January 27, 2017 until March 16, 2017. The effective date of Executive Order 13,780. Executive Order 13,769 lowered the number of refugees to be admitted into the United States in 2017 to 50,000, suspended the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, USRAP, for 120 days. Security, DHS, stopped enforcing portions of the order, and the State Department revalidated visas that had been previously revoked. The order was criticized by members of Congress from both parties, universities, business leaders, Catholic bishops, top United Nations officials, a group of 40 Nobel laureates, Jewish organizations, 1,000 U.S. diplomats who signed a dissent cable, thousands of academics, and long-standing U.S. allies. The order was criticized because it was seen by many as a Muslim ban, and because of its human impact on travelers and visa holders. More than 700 travelers were detained and up to 60,000 visas were provisionally revoked. Background: statutory authorization and related prohibitions. Visas issued in 2016 for the 7 countries affected by Section 3 of the Executive Order. Total is shown by size, and color breaks down type of visa. Whenever the President finds that the entry of any aliens or of any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may by proclamation, and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens, or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem to be appropriate. The act that underlies this, known as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1950,